Okay, this is Sheila, Kayla, Kim, Mike, and Jaden. I'm Jake Lortz, and this is my informative speech. Climate change is a very polarizing topic in today's politics. And right here is a political spectrum to kind of show and give reference to who cares about what regarding climate change. The farther left you go, you get more pro-climate change, and the farther right you go, the more anti-climate change you are. Today I'll be discussing a bunch of facts regarding both sides of the argument. One of the arguments being climate change is real, we need to do something about it, and the other side being climate change is fake or climate change is inconclusive and we can't prove anything regarding the topic, so we shouldn't enforce this upon our industry. And then lastly, the last talked about thing will be the history of climate change in politics. So that will be discussing kind of a timeline of when this whole climate change thing became a part of worldwide politics and how it's kind of grown or declined throughout all the years. Okay, so to start, we'll talk about the pro-climate change side of it. And this is a chart that talks about CO2 emissions in our atmosphere. And as you can see, through the last 100,000 years or so, they've kind of gone up and down, up and down. So it's like a general cycle for both of them. But right now, we're at about twice what the average peak of the cycle is. So that's cause for concern in saying that human emissions and greenhouse gas usage is reason for this influx of CO2 in our atmosphere, which is then causing our ozone layers to deplete, allowing more sun rays into our daily lives, causing higher temperatures. So it's not just about CO2 levels, it's also the sea levels, another evidence regarding it. And in the last 20 years, the sea levels worldwide they've gone up double what they were in the century before that. So in 20 years' time, it did double what it did over 100 years, and this is thought by the people who believe this to be because of climate change. And then the increased average temperature in the 21st century. So since 2001, 16 out of the 17 years have had the highest average temperature, since they started recording that statistic. And then NASA did a study in Greenland and found that in a 4-year period, each year they were losing 100 to 160 cubic miles of ice, from where they live, since Greenland's basically a giant glacier. And then also the glacier movement is seen kind of coincides with this cycle. The glaciers will get farther away from the Arctic pole or Antarctic poles, and then they kind of just move back and forth with the temperature and along with that the CO2. So they're saying the glacier movement is also a reason is also due to the climate change. So on the other side of the coin is anti-climate change, and there's a Climate Depot report that interviewed over 1,000 scientists, and half of them said that it was kind of inconclusive, or that there's no for sure way to say that this is all from humans or that this is mostly from humans. They're saying that for the majority, it could be part of Earth's natural cycle. And then along with that, there's no definite proof of that CO2 is the cause of it. And then they also use glacier movement as part of their argument, saying that since they've always moved in cycles, that there's no way to say that right now that isn't just part of the general cycle, since that's because of human life on Earth. If you put the whole time the Earth has been rotating around the sun into an hour-long time, the people have only been in recording history for 1 minute out of that 60-minute time period. So it just that's kind of a metaphor to show how little recorded time we have, and there could be bigger cycles through like ice ages and stuff like that people just really we don't have recorded history on. So they're saying that this is just cyclical, in that right now it could be natural and not actually from human emissions. And then the other important fact is the economic impact, and that is important in that industry does not want to change their ways of, especially with factories producing products, if this thing isn't real. So they're not gonna go by these new regulations and policy by protection agencies if it's gonna hurt their business. So now we're gonna talk about the politics of climate change, and there's a timeline by PBS that kind of laid out from beginning of climate change talks worldwide to now. And kind of important throughout the whole time period of it is, as I talked about before, the ideologies of each side. So it's vastly Democrat versus Republican, yay versus nay throughout this whole time. And the first worldwide conference was in 1979, where worldwide leaders from all major industrialized nations met and discussed this ongoing problem, or possible problem at the time. And about 18 to 20 years later, they came up with the Kyoto Protocol, which is a protocol that is going to limit industrialized nations' use of greenhouse gases. So it's kind of putting a maximum on how much they can use per year, and how they have to kind of decline over the years to find alternate forms of energy. And right after the Kyoto Protocol came out, and this was all going through politics, and ExxonMobil was kind of the first major corporation that came out against the pro-climate change, and they had a lot of lobbying efforts, and they made their own organization discussing how this is inconclusive and they can't force this upon us. So they've played a role kind of from the beginning as the other side, because they don't want, as an energy corporation, they don't want to have to change the way they do things and make their way of doing things more inefficient. So the Kyoto Protocol was in effect up until 2001, when George W. Bush kind of pulled the United States out of the Kyoto Protocol. And he cited how developing countries don't need to abide by this protocol, so why should industrialized nations? And I guess the counter argument to that is, well, these industrialized nations, by the name of it, industrialized, are going to be using a lot more greenhouse gases than the developing countries. But that's what he cited as the reason why. And also in 2011, the U.S. House Committee on Global Warming also disbanded, and they cited just budgeting issues as the reason why that disbanded. But you can see kind of throughout the 2000s, the U.S. kind of distanced themselves from this. And today in politics, also Young had an article talking about President Trump's various comments on climate change, just to kind of put into scope of how the varying views of climate change in today's world. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. So his idea is that the Chinese made this protocol up because they were already abiding by these regulations to hurt the U.S. economy. So his thinking is that it's more of an economic war between China and the U.S. than it is bettering the whole world. And then he had another one that reads, "It's really cold outside. They're calling it a major freeze, weeks ahead of normal. Man, we could use a big fat dose of global warming." So that's another example of him, and probably the majority of Americans, downplaying the seriousness of the issue or the reality of the issue. But that's just one side of the coin. And then jobs versus the earth. So that's kind of what we talked about before with the economic impact, and how major corporations in industry are not going to want to change their way of doing things and hurt their efficiency and their profits just to help something that may or may not be true. And then, as I talked about before, party polarization. It's always been a red versus blue, Democrat versus the Republican issue, and it will probably continue to be. But as time goes on, we continue to get more evidence we get more arguments for both sides, so at least it's kind of going like that. And then in conclusion, like I just said, there's always going to be two sides to every argument. And after today, I'd hope that everybody in my audience would feel more informed regarding each side of the issue, no matter what you believe before it. And because that's really what needs to happen, people need to be informed on everything in politics, not just climate change, and they need to understand and appreciate both sides of each argument instead of just having their own and hating somebody for believing something else when they don't know anything about the other side of the argument. So that's going to be the only way to find middle ground and actually get something done. And for climate change advocates, it'll take millions of people worldwide to lessen the current impact or not impact people are having on the environment. And that's just as it would take millions of informed constituents to create a truly efficient government.